Schools come to me when something went wrong. I really value education, my own, my children's, the clients I serve, and what they're doing to make a difference. Because if you have a great education, it opens up the opportunities of choice for you. The Texas Education Code has a standard of best interest of the student. My legal advice is based on best interest of the student. I love what I do, and I love to talk about it.
Thanks for tuning in to Keep It Legal, the show where we break down concepts, litigation, and current events with our legal experts. I'm your host, Mark Anik. Joining us today is Katie Anderson of Dallas-based Carrington, Coleman, Sloman, and Blumenthal LLP. Katie, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's wonderful to have you here. You and I spoke on the phone last week, or nowadays, there are no more phone calls. We were on Zoom, of course, staring at each other through our computers. And you said something that I wrote down, and I just want to repeat so that you can expound on it. You said, I love what I do, and I love talking about what I do. So let's assume you and I have not spoken before. Tell me what it is that you do that you love so much.
I love serving educational institutions who are helping students get a great education, K through 12, public-private charter, and housing authorities who are making sure that people have safe, affordable housing, and nonprofit organizations dedicated to youth, such as Girl Scout councils. And because of the missions of those clients, I feel really passionate to be part of the story. If I can give them great legal advice, they leaves them more time to serve their mission, to fulfill their mission.
To do the things they're supposed to be doing in the first place.
Instead of spending time with lawyers.
Not that we don't all absolutely enjoy spending time with lawyers.
That's right, Mark.
I want to be clear about that.
Love lawyers.
Yeah.
Well, and people are quick to criticize lawyers, but I'll tell you who people love is their own lawyer. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure my clients feel that way about the service I'm giving them.
Right. I think that statement's absolutely right. Everybody loves their own lawyer, especially when she is the one who shows up. I worked with an attorney years ago, and I said, do you like what you do? And he said, yeah, I do. And I said, why? He said, because I'm the fireman. I'm the one they call when the house is burning down. Is that similar to your environment?
It very much is. It's an honor to be in the trenches with someone on what may be their worst work day, and that they've come to you for advice, and you bring your passion and compassion along with your substantive knowledge to help them get through it and provide advice that's not just good to answer lawfully what their options are, but give them pragmatic solutions they can actually use. It feels amazing when you help them solve those problems.
And you become, in that context, then the trusted advisor that we always hear people referring to, right?
You are inner circle, you're under the cone of silence, you are really in the C-suite, you're with the key decision makers. It spoils you a little when you go back to your normal citizen life and you're not talking to the CEO of an organization or the superintendent. Because as the lawyer, you are in the room where it happens. You're there when the decisions are made. You're consulted about key pieces of their programming, of solutions they've got to offer. It really means a lot to be that trusted advisor, as you're saying. That's exactly the right word I'd use.
So if you're in the room where it happens, you get to see things that we do not. Talk to me a little bit about that within the boundaries of confidentiality. What grand or general statements would you make about the people who, let's begin with schools. What statements could you tell me about people who operate our public and private educational institutions?
So I'm a fan of educators. I really respect what they're doing and how important their role is to society. I really value education, my own, my children's, the clients I serve, and what they're doing to make a difference. Because if you have a great education, it opens up the opportunities of choice for you. You can be successful on a lot of paths. Education is the easiest one, because if you've got the knowledge, then you have the first step towards whatever it is you want to do with that knowledge. Schools come to me when something went wrong, right? Now, I will say they also hire me to prevent something going wrong, which I love, drafting policies, making sure the contracts are sound, enacting training, putting training in place to minimize the risk. But when something has happened that they wish hadn't happened, It's really important that they feel safe calling their lawyer to tell them everything about what got them where they are, and that the lawyer listen without judgment. I'm not qualified to do the job of my clients. I don't judge for how they do it. I care that they do it with integrity and with a passion for the mission they're serving. But the first thing I want them to do is feel safe telling me what the problem is and how they got there, so that we can work collaboratively, quickly, but without haste, to find some solutions.
Is it a bit like walking into your therapist and the therapist has to convince you as the patient, hey, this is a safe place and it's only going to work if you unburden yourself and tell me everything I need to know?
If I'm doing it right, yes. And my favorite call I got from a client was not on a legal question, but when she called me to say, Katie, I know this isn't a legal question, which also means I don't have to pay you for it, but I really trust your judgment. Because to give good legal advice, you have to understand the problem, you have to understand the law, and then you have to provide options that show good judgment for that environment.
That's a huge victory for you. I'm imagining you hang up the phone and you kind of do a jig around your desk. That's wonderful.
I have endorphins released regularly throughout my day.
Endorphins are good. You said schools come to me when something goes wrong. Give me your top 3 list of the things that can go wrong, or maybe the ones that seem to happen most frequently nowadays.
Key areas for most schools are keeping employees, attracting and retaining diverse talent, and making sure that the educators that they have are both qualified, follow their rules, they have high ethical standards, they have codes of conduct, because they're entrusted with children, the K through 12 level. And so they very much want to have great people who connect with children and provide education. There are a lot of difficulties that we're facing, right? We have teacher shortages more than we don't in Texas. We have a lot of leave policies that are fair and appropriate, and we want to give employees leave when they are entitled to it, they're qualified for it. But you do have a percentage of people who might take advantage of it or try to get a leave that they're not entitled to. And as a school, you run by physically being present and ready to teach. So there's a lot of challenges with employee issues. Employees, for the most part, are very collaborative in the learning environment, but they get crossways just like all humans do. So you've got grievances by and between and among your employees, and you need to work through those quickly and well. Really important that you follow policies on how to have those heard. For public schools, those employees have some due process rights. So when they have a complaint, they have an avenue to have it heard, to have it addressed. I like being involved with those. I like trying to find out what is at play beyond just what is obvious on the surface of what the employees are saying happened. You sometimes see a personality conflict or often a miscommunication, much like I do when I come in for an investigation, perhaps of a discrimination complaint, which is another big area. I enjoy it. I don't like that employees feel that someone has caused them to be discriminated against or harassed. But I really like to get to know people and understand where they're coming from. And almost always I can find a part of the problem isn't just what happened in that incident that they're concerned about, but they've done something with how the balance of power is, or the reporting is, or the communication. There's something about a style or an expectation that I sometimes can help remedy to leave them better than I found them, not just to resolve the immediate grievance, but set them up to have a better working relationship on a good day.
On a good day.
That's a win for me.
Those are immensely challenging moments. I mean, you're doing, on one level, labor and employment law.
Absolutely.
Right? So you've got to be skilled in that.
Yes, and that law is very fluid, changes all the time. And what's really important to me is to be at a full-service firm like Carrington Coleman, because we have specialists who know and only practice in that area that are a tremendous resource for me.
I want to back up just a little bit because I'm always fascinated by the areas that people choose to focus on in their career. Our producer, Alyssa, and I sat down at this very table with your colleague, Andrea Perez, last year. We love her as well.
Love her.
We should just state that out loud. And she was talking about being a third year in law school and trying to figure out what to do. And all of a sudden, art dropped in front of her. And so it's a natural question for me to ask, how did you end up with schools? How did that happen?
So I didn't realize coming out of school that there was a specialty in representing governmental entities. And I found it quickly as a young lawyer and kind of scooched my way into a practice group because of the Constitution, the federal Constitution, and primarily the Bill of Rights. I'm a bit of a First Amendment junkie. I love that we have these rights as citizens and that our governmental institutions have to comply with them. And in the school setting, you see that arise with both employees and students on First Amendment speech rights, First Amendment religious rights, both the free exercise of religion and the prohibition against establishing religion. Comes up all the time in the Fourth Amendment. Who can we search? What can we seize? With employees, sometimes that's drug testing. With students, it's what is in that backpack, right? It affects books. What books can and should be available once they're available, if there's a concern with them. What are the processes and procedures to honor the First Amendment rights while still making good decisions for students and allowing parents a strong voice for their own students?
So you're looking across the table at my notes because I had written down First Amendment and I had a big star next to it. If I would hazard a guess, if I walked up to most parents not familiar with what you do, others, and said, okay, Katie works with school districts. In working with school districts, I don't think they would default to First Amendment issues, but you've just listed a whole bunch of them, and there are more, no doubt.
They come up absolutely all the time, and they're important. They're really important. That's a right that lets our democracy work, that we can speak up even against our government, even against each other. We can agree not to agree. We can not agree to agree. I guess that means we disagree. But that's something that we're allowed to do without punishment, without consequence. And I believe in the value of it.
Almost sounds like you would have made a good reporter.
I wanted to study journalism, and my parents discouraged me because apparently it's a hard life. True or false?
Your parents are very wise individuals. Alyssa and I are sitting over here shaking our heads. You mentioned employee retention. And I found a piece yesterday, knowing that you and I were going to sit down. I just had to grab this. It's about a California school district in San Mateo County that they're building housing for teachers so that they can attract teachers in a state where the cost of living is through the roof. You're nodding your head like this was a surprise to me. It's not a surprise to you?
What's amazing about you mentioning this is it parlays beautifully with my other main practice area in representing housing authorities.
I'm here for you.
Right? You got me, Mark. You got me. But it's so important to understand that workforce housing is in short supply, that some of our economic centers that are thriving like Dallas are very expensive to live. And we've got to figure out how to have affordable housing where people can live close enough to the economic centers so that they can provide the amazing professional services to support, such as law firms and schools. And so even locally, schools joke a little bit about maybe we could get some tiny houses back behind the football field because our teachers need to live somewhere. And we know in some of the communities in North Texas that those teachers are driving 45 miles so that they can live off that pay the salary a teacher gets and still work in an area that has a degree of affluence.
Do you want to say anything about teacher pay, or is that a difficult issue for someone who works with districts?
No, I think it's a fair question, and I think it's an important area. No teacher is paid what they deserve. Well, maybe a couple, and I help fire them, so it's fine. Teacher terminations are another big area, and you don't ever want it to get to that point. But if someone's not doing what they need to do for children, I have walked districts through that process, which is time consuming and has a lot of due process hurdles. And that's where my litigation background helps me through that administrative process.
I imagine. You mentioned districts here, jokingly referring to maybe building tiny houses. Do we have anybody? Have you come across anybody in Texas that's considering building housing yet in a manner such as this California district?
I don't know that any of them have gotten far enough to go through the budgeting cycle with their board to propose a line item for it. But there is a lot of talk amongst superintendents locally about how are we going to make sure our teachers live close enough to come to work the hours we require them to be here, and that we can retain great educators, right? There's a fight for great teachers. Where are you going to teach? Just like there is for police officers, where are you going to perform this public service? Hopefully where you grew up and love and have people you care about, but also maybe where you're paid a little more.
If one of your school districts were to call you up today and say, Katie, we're building housing 2 years from now, we're going to have housing for our teachers or for some of our teachers, what kind of additional legal issues does that create in your mind that you need to help them cover?
Oh, that's a great question, because a lot of my job as a school lawyer is to be an issue spotter and figure out which expert to bring in. So you're going to want real estate folks. You're going to want someone with the municipality, governmental land use piece on how we get approvals for the type of housing we're going to need. I can fill in on the Fair Housing Act. That's an area I practice in regularly that's implicated from those questions. Depending on the land available, you might need some environmental advice because of what could be on the property or what remedial actions are necessary.
Let's say you go ahead and build the housing. I'm going to help you game plan here for a scenario. So you build the housing and somebody's getting into the tub and they slip and fall and break a hip. Is that a problem now for the school district?
So the question you ask is going to depend on who actually owns the units and or leases the units and or manages the units. So it does depend on how the structure is set up. I don't think schools are going to undertake owning the property, although in Texas, with the Texas Tort Claims Act, there is a waiver of governmental immunity, but for schools, the problem has to have been caused by a motor-driven vehicle. So unless a motorcycle knocked you down in the bathtub, there's no waiver of immunity.
Strange happening, but I could see that. I could see that. Okay. I want to go back to First Amendment because as a former reporter, it's something that I love and I find fascinating. A story that ends up in the news over and over again about schools in our area has to do with book bans. Any overarching opinion that you have on book bans that you want to talk about?
Yes, a lot of opinions on book bans. For parents who are involved in their child's education, know their children, and make good decisions for their children, I don't think any school is going to question that. There's lots of mechanism for parents to have a strong voice, even in curriculum choices. There are always the ability of a parent to say, no, my child is not going to read Hunger Games in third grade, right? Not that that's happening. But what we're seeing is this movement where parents or community members or advocates or advocacy groups want to come in and change what books are available to children based on the content. And so you see it in two places. One is the classroom, the curriculum, and one is the library. The library is a little more popular of a target because curriculum are so specifically defined and there's lots of processes and procedures for how books are selected, when books are removed, how they're evaluated, how parents pick them. Kids come home with a syllabus, it has the information on there, parents are well apprised. The library, that kid might sneak off and get that Judy Blume book, was very popular when I was in elementary school, right? And a little controversial, although reading it now, you're like, well,
kind
no.
of tame by comparison.
3:00 on TV, those things are now running, right? I used to give some advice about how appropriate is it? Well, is it on prime time? But every kid, not every kid, but a lot of kids have access to devices that is giving them the ability to access content that is inappropriate for their age. And I would encourage all parents to spend some time ensuring that they're watching what their child has access to away from school as much as at school. If there's a concern with the book, there's nothing wrong with talking to the school about what's okay for your kid and not okay. And all parents should be opening the backpack. My kids didn't like it when I did that, but I actually read pretty much every book they read. So I could ask them about it and talk about it and see what it was. And I'm also a book nerd, so that makes sense. But to come into a district where you don't live or work and to challenge a book based on a content because it addresses a subject you're not comfortable with, raises a lot of First Amendment issues. And so there actually are very strong, stringent procedures. And I'm finding that schools take them very seriously. Librarians care very much that children see themselves reflected in books, but that those books be age appropriate. Schools are in my opinion, schools are very respectful of parent rights. The issue really becomes when it's people seeking to change what books are offered beyond to their own children or at their own school, and with an agenda that feels sometimes political.
I want to go from that specific to a broader question because I want to give you the opportunity to address this. Again, going back to my reporting days, we covered stories at school when something went wrong, right? When something was out of the norm, whether it involved a student, a teacher, a parent, some sort of advocacy group, whatever it may be. So those are the things that make the headlines. And I think we all know that. Maybe we know it, maybe we don't know it well enough. From your perspective, sitting there in the room with the people making decisions, what are your thoughts about, generally speaking, how good a job schools do, teachers and administrators, in preparing our kids for tomorrow? Because that's their job, right?
Right. It might be self-serving to say it, but if they've hired a lawyer who works in this area, they do care to get it right. And so I'm a little spoiled and perhaps a little biased. The clients I have the honor to serve care to do right by children. The Texas Education Code has a standard of best interest of the student. My legal advice is based on best interest of the student. If there's wiggle room, if there's discretion, if there's options, I'm going to lean in favor of the best interest of the student. They're youth. They're vulnerable. They are entitled to this education. They are required by law to get this education. It needs to be available to them in a safe environment that fosters learning, that creates and ignites that passion for learning. So I think schools work really hard to do really well. The people that I work with, superintendents, assistant superintendents of HR, safety and security personnel, even police departments, I see quickly if they have a heart for kids and how they make decisions. And if they do, I'm going to be able to give them advice they're going to be able to use that's likely going to have a good result. If they don't, I bet they won't be there for long.
You mentioned parents and yourself as a parent looking at your kid's backpack, pulling out the books. And we're also talking about all the things we want and expect schools to do, which is a list that's grown and grown and grown. This is purely opinion, you can answer it or you can pass. Do we too often ask schools to do the work that we're unwilling to do? We're unwilling to dive into the backpack. We're unwilling to say to the student, hey, put down that cell phone for a minute and read.
We have asked schools to do more things than they have the funding to do. We have put responsibilities on schools for all pieces of education, but well beyond that. Students are in the care of schools more hours than used to be true, and that's okay. There are a segment of our population that is trying to do right by their children, but has a lot of hurdles to helping their children in school, and thus rely sometimes on school staff. If you have a parent who's unable to provide tutoring for their student, that school is going to do it, and they're going to do it without charge. Schools offer after-school programs. They offer enrichment programs. They offer programs sponsored by the UIL. I'm a band nerd myself, so
I saw that in
I
your
love
bio.
that. Yeah.
What did you play?
I played clarinet and I marched in Longhorn Band. My children laugh at me because I tell everyone I've ever met, but I'm very proud of it, and it was a great experience. We're asking a lot of schools, and then we're more critical than ever of how they're doing the things that we've asked them as a society to do or written right into the statutes that they have to do. Some of that criticism is appropriate. Some of it's fair. I, as a parent, if I saw an issue, would never have hesitated to bring it to the attention of someone. I would have tried to do it in the way that the Education Code talks about parents as partners. You hope you get parents as partners. Sometimes you have parents who are going to be unhappy with the decision no matter what it is. I've also found that parents tend to be happy or unhappy with a whole school or a whole district based on the teacher their child has at the time. And so that might be limited information or a limited experience. Parents know more about their children than schools do, mostly. But children are not always the same at school as they are at home. I had a bright teacher tell me once when my son was in second grade, he did well in school and came home and disintegrated quickly because he was tired from holding it together all day and following all the societal rules and the peer pressures and the things that are expected. And she said in our parent-teacher conference that as long as your kid is behaving pretty well for other people, you have to be okay that they don't always come home and perform their very best lovable self at home. They have a lot of social pressure kids didn't have in the past with technology, with social media, cyberbullying. All those things happen. And so that creates a whole lot of both legal questions and pragmatic problems for both parents and schools. And when they can work together to solve them, the answers for children are likely to be successful and workable. And when they work at cross purposes, I'm afraid sometimes that child or student gets lost.
You just mentioned something that has to do with technology, and it reminded me of a story here recently where one of the school districts decided it was going to ban phones in the schools. So if I'm one of your clients and I call you up and I say, Katie, we're thinking of doing this, what's your response?
My response is it is lawful to consider this as an option. Let's walk through the pros and cons. I want to know why you want to do it. If you have a good reason, they're distracting, they're going off in class, etc., is there a way to solve that issue without banning them completely? My daughter attended Booker T. Washington High School for the Performing and Visual Arts. I can say the full name.
I like that you can too.
She was a dancer and got a great education, had a great experience. In one of her courses, as I learned on back to school night, because I never missed one, they took roll by putting the phone in a place with the student's name where they couldn't access it. So if there was an emergency, which is what parents are worried about, and not allowing that phone, they could access it. But barring an emergency, they weren't allowed to touch it. And then roll was easy to call because you could just see whose phone was missing. As a Girl Scout leader, I was a camp mom. We asked our girls to please bring their phones because they're gonna bring their phones. And we wanted to see that they had them because that made it easier to collect when we arrived at camp. And then we gave it back right before we left so they could plug it in because we wanted them to call mom and dad to be at pickup. We were ready to see mom and dad when we got back
because
from camp.
Because as the camp mom, you didn't want to get stuck with them in the parking lot.
Please don't be late.
Right. It occurs to me that trying to ban that or any other type of technology, given its ubiquitousness, ubiquity, give me the proper adjective. I mean, it's almost like trying to ban air.
It is a little bit like that because what are you going to also do? Not have your Apple Watch? Wonder if that's the only watch and you're going to time yourself in taking a test. You can take precautions with geofences. You can minimize what the network will allow you to pick up. You have control over the server and the Wi-Fi. There's a lot of things schools can do to control how technology is used in their school. Will someone abuse it? Of course they will, right? But you can't make all your rules for a one-off. So there's a lot of empowerment schools have to figure out how to use technology proactively, to use it well, such as generative artificial intelligence. Schools are struggling right now, as all of society, as this tool isn't yet where we know it's going to be as far as reliability, protections. How do we use this in a way that helps educate our students and prepare them for the workforce or post-secondary education without allowing it to be used for nefarious purposes like plagiarism, bullying. So those are the things that are keeping, I think, school leaders up and that we get calls about, and that we're working to stay abreast of the evolving law and technology. We know law lags technology, so it's a challenge all the time, but it's fun to think about what we have in our society that can proactively help us learn well and better. Some of the schools I'm working with are talking to me about the bots that are quizzing students on areas where that particular student had a challenge. And even in a foreign language, because there's an auditory component that there wouldn't be in prior versions of technology.
It occurs to me, I remember when my daughter was in 4th grade and her teacher had this, she was the tech whiz at the school. And, this is coming up 15 or more years ago now, but she passed out these remotes and she would put the quiz question up on the board and the kids would key in their answer. And as a kid from the 1960s and 70s, I thought this was extraordinary. And now they're dealing with AI. Are you getting calls on this already?
We're not yet, so I'm educating myself ahead of those calls because they aren't really using it in the ways that businesses are using it. There are mostly prohibitions and limits in the schools right now. I know the Texas Association of School Boards, which is a great resource for our public schools, is developing policies and procedures, guidelines. They are very proactive in looking at what the law will allow and then what the technology can do and then what really works in schools. A lot of even in their legal staff, they have former teachers, some of my favorite people. Right. And if a lawyer's any good at all, they spend a part of their day educating, whether they're in the courtroom educating a jury or they're on the phone with a client educating us to the law.
You're educating all the time. You've educated the two of us just sitting here now talking about your practice, right?
I'd like to say I schooled you, but yes, no.
We've been schooled before, and sometimes being schooled's a good thing. I might walk out of here knowing things I didn't know before. But really, it's only a matter of time before one of your clients calls you up and says, Katie, we have this AI issue. What do we do?
I'm worried enough about it that I'm spending time reading, researching, and using AI myself. Only approved, firm approved.
Thank you.
Technology, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I had my training.
Some attorneys have had an issue with courts with AI.
That's exactly right. And the American Bar Association is following it. There's a concern, of course, with lawyers and all we do for ethics. If a client is going to pay us for our time, then what portion of that time is spent using or not using AI? What do we need to represent to the client? How reliable it is? Those are the things that are being considered as this technology develops. There is not currently sufficient reliability in the tool, or at least the general tools generally available and known, to require lawyers to use it. There will be. And the prohibitions are fairly limited right now. We have to be careful as lawyers not to divulge confidential information that gets loaded into these large language models and then gets shared in a way that breaches confidentiality. So there's things we have to be attuned to as we watch this developed, and I'm trying to stay a step ahead. To be proactive in learning technology requires me to think creatively. It requires me to have a degree of courage, which you have to have in education, I think. If you're ever going to make a big difference for a lot of people, you have to do things that other people haven't done or aren't willing to do or can't take the risk of doing. So I'm pushing myself just a little outside my comfort zone to learn something I don't know so that when schools make the call, I'm armed to do a great job for them.
Can we talk about some personal stuff?
Let's do it.
You mentioned kids. How many kids?
2.
2. Either of them interested in the law?
Ha. Yes, my son Ryan just graduated from Baylor Law, where my husband and I met, and we're very proud to say he's employed and going to work this fall in litigation here in Dallas.
Good for him. Congratulations to him.
And me.
Yes.
Thank you.
And your other child?
Emily, she is a pharmacy student at the University of Texas. She's in her 2nd year,
Wow.
and she thinks there's something wrong with the rest of the family.
We'll just leave that right where it is. right where it is. You're a Baylor law grad and you went to UT undergrad.
Exactly.
Anything you want to tell us about your education?
Those are the best of both worlds, right? Being at the University of Texas, I learned about people from other countries and other religions and other backgrounds. It was so much fun to be on a campus that size with a football team that was a focus of the culture, right? That was fun for me.
Especially being in the marching band.
I mean, I had to go to every game, and I wormed my way into every single game home and away for 4 years. There were some games they didn't take the whole band, but they took a pep band, and that pep band was determined by a number of different ways. One way was you signed up first, so I just got there when the building opened. Another way was to be a section leader, so I made sure to become a section leader my second year, which was a little bit unusual. I'm a little bit of a go-getter, and I like to be in charge. So having that experience was really fun. The Longhorn Band at the time and probably now has the highest GPA for any non-academic organization. Music makes you smarter. The social science and the real science, the hard science tells us
it's art and math simultaneously.
It is. And so being with a bunch of students who worked hard to acquire that level of success in playing an instrument and then walking while you do it, right? It was a great group of people. And we encouraged each other to do well in school. You had to continue to keep your grades up to balance that with travel and practice. And it was just a really good experience for me. And then it was probably better I didn't stay in Austin for my law degree because Austin's pretty fun. And Waco at the time wasn't. Baylor Law is so serious of a training of a litigation program, but also a critical thinking program. Baylor lawyers then and now are really taught to think in a way that's broader than theory. It's solving problems by understanding all the problems that are implicated. To be a good lawyer, you answer the client's question. To be a great lawyer, you help the client form the question. You know more about what the legal parameters are. So your job is to work with them and make it safe for them to tell you everything. Know enough about the industry, know enough about the client, and then the certain circumstance so that you can pose what else they should be thinking about that could get them in trouble that they didn't know to ask you.
Speaking of not knowing what to ask, is there anything else about your practice that you want to talk about while we're here?
I think something that distinguishes me from others in my field is that I am at a full service firm. And that means I've got an incredible number of experts who can give me a running start to an answer or can just answer a question for a client without me having to get up to speed. It's much more cost effective. In purchasing legal services, clients need to really understand what a firm can give them, what resources they have, what experience they have, what kind of environment they work in. I can only work in a productive collegial environment. I'm incapable of anything else. If I'm not making my colleagues better and they're not helping me be better, I'm not at the right place. And I'll tell you, Mark, I am at the right place. I'm really thankful for the opportunity to be a Carrington Coleman lawyer. We have a good reputation. We have a great breadth of knowledge. We laugh a lot. We take ourselves very seriously when it comes to client work and then not very seriously at all the rest of the time. So it's a lot of fun.
That sounds pretty healthy.
It's healthy, and we have a higher percentage of women attorneys than is true for local, state, nation average. We have great women leaders. Our managing partner,
woman managing partner,
Monica Latin, is killing it, right? And Kelly Hinson is our general counsel. Both great practitioners, great litigators, fantastic at what they do, but also good at leadership. And they do that in a number of ways. You know, there's a whole set of leadership skills and probably some books they read, but then they care about their people. Our whole executive committee cares about our people. Yes, we have to make good dollars and cents decisions, but we have to do it in a way that honors that we are different. We have different practices and we have different needs. And I feel like our lawyers here, by being a regional firm, we have a voice. Our leaders know us. People that are making decisions for the lawyers and the amazing professional staff we have know us and make better choices by being the size that keeps us that nimble.
We're seated here in a conference room at the firm, and that portrait of Jim Coleman is on the wall staring down at us. If Jim could walk back in today, I mean, he's legendary, right? if he were to walk back in today, what would he think of the current Carrington Coleman?
I'd like to think he's really proud. You know, the Dallas Women Lawyers Association has had an award they've given over years to a man who's supportive of elevating women in the profession. It's named after Mr. Coleman. I recently learned by being a member of the Dallas Bar Association board that there's an archive there kept in the Arts District Mansion. And it used to be that lawyers lawyers who wanted to be part of the Dallas Bar had to apply for admission. And they had cards that listed certain things about them. And I asked Alicia Hernandez, the executive director of Dallas Bar Association, if someone would go down in that creepy basement and pull Mr. Coleman's card. And they did. And it was really fun to see who sponsored him and what happened, who swore him in, those kind of things. History matters when it sets you up for a culture of putting clients first, firm second, and self third.
Katie, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. This
Thanks.
has been very, very enjoyable.
Mark, thanks for having me. It's been fun to talk about my practice. I love what I do, and I love to talk about it.
Again, that was Katie Anderson of Carrington Coleman, Sloman, and Blumenthal, LLP in Dallas. You can visit ccsb.com for more information about her and about the firm. Make sure to like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and tune in next time to Keep It Legal. I'm your host, Mark Anik. We'll see you then.